All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ariel. I'm currently a D2 at Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry in London. Um, just some important pre-seminar information. The seminar is recorded, and I'll be talking about my personal experience and sort of tips and tricks that I picked up along the way from starting my undergrad to starting dental school and everything in between. There's a lot of content to go over and time is pretty limited, so it will be a bit sort of big picture and broad. But if something catches your eye, or if you have more questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end. And if not, you're more than welcome to book some sessions with me and we can chat about it one-on-one. So about me, besides this awful headshot, my name is Ariel. Like I said, I'm currently a D2 at Western at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. Some of my hobbies when I'm not in class or in clinic are being at the gym and working out, playing sports, playing board games. I really love to cook and I like to spend time with my friends and family. Just some background about me. I did my undergrad at the University of Guelph, where I did an honors Bachelor of Science with a major in biomedical sciences and a minor in nutrition and nutraceutical sciences. Some of my extracurriculars while I was at Guelph included the Biomed Student Association, Best Buddies, Hillel. I was a research volunteer and I did a thesis project in my fourth year. I also was a summer research student, and I also did some summer shadowing of dentists and dental specialists. So the question comes up a lot, and the reality is that every single person's sort of why dentistry is going to be different. For some people, it's a particular interaction they had with a dentist or a dental healthcare worker. For some people, it's something they read about or something they learned that really sparked their interest. Whatever it is, whatever your particular story is or happens to be, there are certain aspects of the career that should intrigue you. And if they do, suggest that dentistry is absolutely the right place for you. And one of the big things that makes dentistry stand out from a lot of other healthcare professions is that it's not a monolith in terms of the expertise that's required. Dentistry is really this cornucopia of medicine and art. It requires entrepreneurship and a business mindset. It requires a foundational knowledge and application of chemical and physical sciences. And it also requires you to be a good and caring teacher. In addition, dentistry is a profession that really requires the use of your hands. Something that I've been asked before and that comes up a lot and that I wondered too when I was applying was whether or not I should be working on my manual dexterity before dental school and what I can do to improve that. And there's no one size fits all answer. Some people will say, absolutely yes, you should be honing it from as early an age as possible. Other people will say no, because in dental school, you have so many hours of sim clinic or simulation clinic where you're using your hands and you're learning how to drill that it's absolutely a skill that can be learned and honed while you're already here. And so for me personally, I'd say I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I definitely think there's merit to sort of starting to hone your hand skills and work with your hands through sort of extracurriculars or hobbies that you find interesting, whether that's knitting or cooking or sewing. Art is a really great example, playing an instrument, even playing sports or video games. You get that hand-eye coordination up to a particular level. All of those are really great, not only because they can help set you on a good path and a good trajectory for using your hands in dental school and as a dentist, but also because when you're applying, you want to show that you've been thinking about the career and you've been thinking about the profession for a while. And one way you can do that is by showing that you've done extracurriculars or activities that prepare you to use your hands, which, like I said, is something super important in dentistry. Something else that really drew me to dentistry personally was this idea of starting a profession, being an expert in a niche field. The human body has so much going on at any given moment that it's impossible to know everything about everything at any given moment. And so whether you're pursuing medicine and trying to learn it all and then trying to specialize, that's one path that you can go. But if you're interested in being an expert in the teeth, the mouth, the soft tissues around it, the neck, and the head, then dentistry is absolutely a place where you can thrive. You start off going right into dentistry, and so you learn systemic health, but you take extra courses learning really in-depth and in-detailed anatomy, physiology, pathology, microbiology, developmental biology, and a bunch of these different courses that help contextualize all the different details of what's going on in your head and neck. And knowing that was something that super interested me, and I love this idea of being an expert in a niche field. Also, once you're working, you're the expert. You know, nurses and doctors and other healthcare workers will be turning to you as an expert when it comes to oral health and teeth and the mouth. And so having that really special role, that's designated job in society, to me seemed like a really rewarding way to go about my life and to sort of occupy that niche. And so that's what really drew me to dentistry, amongst other things. But something that really surprised me, and may or may not surprise you too, is that even though you're already sort of in this niche little field of the mouth, the head, and the neck, there's so much room to subspecialize within dentistry. As a general dentist, you have the opportunity to practice a little bit of everything, but there are so many different specialties, whether it's endodontics, orthodontics, oral and maxillofacial surgery, periodontics, oral and maxillofacial radiology, pediatrics, the list goes on. So there's so much opportunity for you to continue your education and to become even more of an expert in an even smaller niche field within this small niche field, which to some people is super cool and super interesting. But on top of that, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what your work life can look like. You have the opportunity to work in private practice. You can go and continue to become an expert in dental public health. You can become a hospitalist or a hospital dentist. You can continue to work in research and academia. And the greatest thing, in my opinion, is that you can do a little bit of everything too. You're not bound by any one sort of career trajectory, and there's a lot of room to make it your own and mix and mingle between all these different career paths. And lastly, another really big part of dentistry, for me at least, and something else that really drew me to dentistry, is the idea of being this sort of first line proactive caregiver when it comes to patient education and in terms of treatment and taking care of the mouth and of their oral health. More and more research is suggesting that there are so many systemic health conditions that can originate or can be exacerbated by poor oral health. And so being that first line of defense, teaching patients how to take care of their oral hygiene, how to brush and floss, how to catch disease in its early stages and prevent it from becoming a more expensive and more complicated version of the disease, is super rewarding. And that's something that really drew me to the field, is being that sort of first line proactive caregiver. And that's something that's pretty special about dentistry. So to take a step back, you know, that was a pretty broad idea of the profession as a whole. And to be totally transparent, I'm only in my second year. I haven't worked fully as a dentist. This is all information that I've gathered from shadowing and from learning and things that I've learned in school. But the bulk of my presentation is really going to be about what it took to get here. And I imagine that's what most of you are interested in as well. And so broadly speaking, I do want to be mindful of the fact that there really is no one size fits all solution to getting into dental school. And that's something I'll talk about throughout our conversation tonight. But broadly speaking, the trajectory pretty much goes completing a 3 or 4 year undergraduate bachelor's degree. And depending on the university that you apply to, some will accept a 3-year, some will require a 4-year honors bachelor. You're also required to write the DAT. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, that's sort of the parallel to the MCAT, but for dental school. And it covers a bit different topics besides just the core biology and the core chemistry. And that's something we can chat about a little bit later in our talk. People like to ask, you know, when's the best time to write the DAT? You know, when am I optimized to do the best? And it's not a one size fits all. Most people do tend to write it somewhere after their second year or their third year, because at that point they've completed a majority of the sort of undergrad prereq courses that supplement the content of the DAT really well. But I know a ton of people who wrote it after their 4th year, some people who did a master's and wrote it during their master's or after their master's. There are even a number of students in my class who worked for a few years and then decided they wanted to become a dentist and went back and wrote their DAT after having worked for a bit. So there really is no one size fits all or one's better than the other. It's really specific to your journey and where you're at. But regardless of where you're at, you have to write the DAT in order to get into dental school. You also have to write Casper. Actually, not every university, I believe, requires the DAT anymore. That's something that is going to be university specific, and you should do your homework and double check when you're applying. I believe things have changed since I applied. But anyway, so you have to write that, you write the Casper, and then you submit applications. When it comes to applying to Canadian dental schools, we're not as lucky in the sense of having one centralized portal. You got to do your homework. You got to know where you want to apply, what the requirements are, and what documents they need, and when the deadlines are, because the deadlines aren't sort of the same deadline for every school. Every school will have its own application, its own deadline, and its own schedule and its own process. So you got to do a little bit of extra work in terms of organizing all that and deciding where you want to apply. If you're applying to the States, I believe there is a centralized portal. I'm not exactly sure what it's called because I only applied to Canadian schools in my first application cycle and I got in, so I didn't really end up applying to the States. But there's lots of experts on the Accepted Together site who have applied to the States and who are currently students there in dental school, who I'm sure would be more than happy to talk you through that process if that's something that's interesting to you. After applications, a certain number of applicants are going to be invited for interview, and of course, a certain number of those interviewees will be invited to start dental school. So before we get into each particular step of what sort of makes up the journey of starting your undergrad to getting to dental school, I want to sort of put out a few disclaimers and a few sort of pieces of or tidbits of knowledge that I sort of picked up from my experience and things that I repeat over and over again to anyone who asks about the journey. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I could offer when it comes to things like the DAT is making sure that the courses that you take in your undergraduate program supplement the content on the DAT. And I think that was just cut off there by the picture. They supplement the content of the DAT. I found it really, really helpful to, while studying for the DAT, already have sort of a foundation knowledge in a majority of the content being covered, because A, that meant I was familiar with a lot of the material already, but B, it meant I had a whole second set of resources from my university in order to supplement the resources that I was using to study for the DAT. So if one concept wasn't making sense to me on one particular set of notes, I could go back to my my university lectures or the notes that I had taken, or my peers who I'd studied with to see if they remember the answer. And so that definitely helps when it comes to studying and preparing to write that exam. Outside of those kind of core courses, and depending on your major, they might already be built into your program. For some people, they might have to be electives. But when it comes to picking electives outside of those sort of foundational science courses, and we could talk more specifically about which courses I personally recommend, and different people will tell you different things. But I absolutely encourage you to pick other elective courses based on your interests rather than based on what you think will be a really easy A or what people have told you is a really good GPA booster. There's definitely something to be said about taking courses to boost your grade, but at the end of the day, a course that's designed to only boost your GPA that's really boring might actually end up being more of an obstacle for you, because if it's not interesting, you're not going to want to study it, versus taking electives that might be a little bit tougher, but are super up your alley, super interesting to you, can actually go a long way, not only in terms of you being more interested in raising your GPA, but it can also manifest in things like taking a minor, or even having those extra sort of talking points and pieces of knowledge that you can bring to your application and to your interview. Like I said, my minor was in nutrition, and that was really helpful when I was talking about something on my personal statement, and I was able to pull something that I'd learned from a class into that personal statement, and I used it again in my interview. And so taking those courses that are interesting to you, and being able to draw those bridges between what you learn in those classes to dentistry and what you perceive you might be doing in the day-to-day as a dentist can go a really long way. Find passion, even at not just in school and not just within courses. Find hobbies or things to do that fill your time, that you're truly passionate about, that you're truly interested in doing, whether it's volunteering, engaging in a particular sports intramural on a club or a committee, whatever it is that you want to do, make sure you invest actively in it and you're able to build and grow within the organization or within the group that you're doing it in. It also comes back to this idea of having these extra talking points, and having actively engaged will give you a lot more stories and a lot more experiences to pull from when you're writing your application and when you're interviewing. Something else that was really helpful and that I would encourage you to do throughout your journey, maybe even before you start writing the DAT, is if you can, find a dentist to shadow, and maybe even a specialist too, and start to gauge if you can really see yourself in this career. Dentistry is not like a lot of other jobs. It's pretty unique and it's pretty special, and that could be a benefit or a detriment depending on your personality and what you're interested in and what sort of lifestyle is attractive to you. Something that someone recommended me to do while I was shadowing that really opened my eyes a lot about the realities and the day-to-day of the job is asking the dentist or the dental specialist that you're shadowing, or really any sort of professional that you're shadowing, asking what the most boring part of their day is and what their least favorite thing about the job is. And if what they say to you sounds like something that's even remotely possibly still interesting to you, or even, copable at best, then you're absolutely in the right place and you found something that on the good days will be amazing and on the bad days will still be good. And the last kind of big piece of advice for throughout the entire journey is lean into it and really enjoy the process. It's going to be tough. You're going to have moments of self-doubt, and there might be moments of failure, but lean into the vulnerability that's required in order to grow throughout this process, and it'll go a long way, and it'll also help you enjoy it a lot more. All right, so now we're going to get into the specific step-by-step, and I'll kind of share some tidbits or pieces of knowledge that I've picked up from my experience engaging in that. I'm starting with the DAT. That's sort of the first preliminary step to starting to apply to dental school is studying for the DAT and writing the DAT. People ask, what's the best strategy? How should I study? Everyone studies differently. Something that I focused on while studying that I felt was really helpful when I started dental school was using the DAT as a big exam, and I used it as an opportunity to learn how I learn. Different people learn it in different ways, and what works for one person it won't work for another. But knowing what works best for you will help you be economic with your time and with your efficiency and with the amount of knowledge that you can retain, which is super important when you've got a ton of courses and a ton of clinic going on in dental school. Another big one is this idea of breadth versus depth. Breadth is sort of a superficial knowledge of a lot of things, and depth is knowing a lot of details about very few individual things. It's very tempting, especially as people who are interested in dentistry and interested in being experts in a niche field, to want to know all those little details and to have it all down and memorized in the back of your mind. It's super tempting and it's a super comfortable way to study. But given how much content is on the DAT, how much you're required to know, I personally wouldn't suggest that as the best study strategy for this particular exam. You're much better off, in my opinion, sort of touching on as much as you can and having a really great foundational understanding of as much as you can and how things interplay and interconnect rather than these few individual things. Because even if you do get a question or even two questions that are so random and so specific, and there's no way that you would know this without having memorized every single word of every single textbook, you'd be surprised at how much having a broad spectrum and a pretty wide array or a breadth of knowledge can help eliminate answers and help you succeed in sort of narrowing down your choices. So if you're not able to narrow it down to one, at least you're increasing your odds in terms of the guessing game that you're playing on that one specific question. There's more than one question on the exam. Each question is worth the same amount of points, so don't get bogged up on knowing every single detail for that possible one-off question that might happen. Focus on the high-yield stuff. Very quickly, some resources that I used to study that at the time were really helpful to me was DAT Crusher, which is the resource that's offered for Canadian dental DAT writers. I also used a bit of the DAT Bootcamp for PAT practice or perceptual ability practice. And then also I used a textbook called DAT Crusher, I believe it was called, it's an American one, and they have a really strong biology, or Orgoman, I believe it was called, sorry. It's the Orgoman textbook. It's just a bunch of practice questions for bio and for chem that were harder than the DAT. So if you could ace that textbook, you're in really great shape for the DAT. Very quickly, I'll just also touch on what the DAT looks like. You have your natural science section, which is 40 questions of biology, 30 questions of chemistry, and you have 60 minutes to write that whole section. Within that biology, you can have questions about evolution, ecology, a little bit of microbiology, physiology, the big one, and systems biology, psychology is tested as well as sociology, and environmental ecological patterns. Plant is a big part of the biology section as well. So plant physiology, plant anatomy, plant pathology a little bit. Sort of having these like big topic ideas and having a little bit of knowledge across all of them will go a long way. Chemistry is your pretty standard inorganic chemistry. There's no organic chemistry on the Canadian DAT when I wrote it. There's also no math or physics on the Canadian DAT when I wrote it. The American DAT does have orgo and a math/physics section as well, which are separate from the bio and biochem section. After that, you have another 60-minute section for perceptual ability, which is a series of like visual puzzles that you have to solve in your brain and then pick the correct answer out of a series of multiple choice. So some of the puzzles are you're given 4 angles and you need to rank them just from looking from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Some of them you're required to take a piece of paper and fold it in your head and know which part of the paper goes where. For some, you're required to like look at a particular obscure shape and figure out which hole it would fit through based on these like very minute, millimeter differences in the holes or the options. And so it's different puzzles like that that really test your ability to take something that's 2D and make it 3D in your brain. And the only way to get good at that, in my opinion, is practice, practice, practice. Do as much practice problems as you can. What I did is I would print off a bunch of them because I was the last cohort that wrote it on paper, and have a stack of them every morning or every other morning. Take 30 minutes, go through 1 or 2 sections, bang out your answers, check your answers, record your score, figure out what went wrong, evaluate what you could have done better next time, and then within 45 minutes, move on to whatever it is you have planned for the day. Another really important habit to focus on is, I know with myself, I fall into this trap too, is restudying things that you already know because it makes you feel confident in the knowledge that you already have. Unfortunately, there's just so much information on the DAT that it's an inefficient use of your time to review stuff you already know when you could be looking at topics that you don't know or you're not as confident in. It's super uncomfortable to have to sit with the fact that you don't know something, which is why myself included tends to kind of revert back to re-reviewing stuff that I already know, but really try to keep yourself accountable when it comes to that. Remind yourself of the goal, remind yourself of the big picture and why the discomfort is worth it, and that'll go a long way. Taking practice tests at regular intervals really helps too, because that way you can keep a very like standardized measure of your score and of your improvements, and of course scheduling in breaks and being realistic in your schedule. Casper's a bit different now than when I wrote it, but the overall picture I believe is still true and still strong. Make sure when you're answering the questions, you're paying attention to all perspectives of all the characters or participants in the story. Avoid going down rabbit holes of like, if this, then this, and if this, then this, if this, then this. Try to be very articulate and very specific in what is a reasonable outcome and what are reasonable like things that might happen in response to particular actions that you can take. Before you take any action, make sure to get all information first from as many characters or as many people that you need to get information from in the story. Add a little bit of creativity to your solution. The person marking the exam is going to see the same answer to the same question, who knows how many times. And so having something that's slightly different absolutely goes a long way. And prepare for Casper like you would for an interview. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when it comes to the interview prep. Personal statements, essays, and CVs. Tell a story, not a resume. In my opinion, your personal statement should be a single cohesive narrative. Something that I did that really helped was taking a piece of paper and just brainstorming a list of adjectives that I thought make a good practitioner or a good dentist. I supplemented that with something called the Ken Med rules that I really encourage you to look up if you haven't done so already. And then based on your list of adjectives, try to allude to as many of those or a handful of those that you think are most important in your personal statement. Also cross-reference with the university's website and see what they sort of prioritize and what their mission statement is. Whatever information you're pulling, make sure that you're alluding and not explicitly stating. I think it goes a long way to demonstrate that you have these adjectives rather than explicitly say, I am a team player or I am interested in dentistry. You might have some questions that are not autobiographical sketch or ABS, and instead ask about current topics. When I applied, I was asked an essay question about whether or not I agreed with the mandate to fluoridate water. And so I really encourage you, if you are applying to a school that asks you a question like that, to do your homework thoroughly before you write anything. Doing your homework is different for different topics, but what I did that really helped me was reaching out to dentists who were currently working to ask what they think about it, reading primary journal articles, as well as some like non-peer-reviewed sources, so like news articles or blogs, to see what people who aren't experts in the field are also thinking and what they also feel about it, and sort of get that big picture holistic understanding of all ends of the spectrum. When you're writing your answer, try to give 1 or 2 sentences that explains each side of the conflict before going into what you think or why you think yes versus no or no versus yes. But being able to demonstrate that you can understand why a person might think this way, which is differently from you, will go a long way. And I think it's super important to demonstrate in your application if you can. When it comes to interviews, refer back to that list of adjectives that you made when you were writing your personal statement. And then for each adjective, try to come up with a story or an experience about you that demonstrates that adjective. This is something that you could also do for the Casper, because the Casper, at least when I wrote it, definitely had 1 or 2 questions asking me to write about a time where I was a leader or when I broke a rule or whatever it is. So having sort of a list of adjectives and stories ready to go is super helpful. After you have your stories written down, walk away from it for a few days, and then when you come back to it, take your list of stories and then try to pull out adjectives from the stories. So that in your mind, you're already ready to go both ways, whether the question is asking you about an adjective and you need to give a story, or you're telling a story and you want to pull adjectives that you want to demonstrate about yourself. The biggest piece of advice is don't write out full paragraphs of practice questions and memorize them. It looks super rehearsed and it looks super inauthentic. Use the interview question database to rehearse. I found it super helpful, and it was a really huge resource, and I don't even think I got through all the questions on there. Start practicing early, but before you start practicing with others, something that worked really well for me was recording myself on my laptop and on my phone. Sort of, I wrote like 10 or 15 questions across different cue cards, mixed them up and pulled one randomly, and then would just practice answering it. And then, as super cringy and uncomfortable as it is, watching it back and sort of seeing what worked, what didn't work, what I want to improve the next time I answer a question went a really long way. Once you're sort of a bit more comfortable with that and you're ready to practice with others, it can go a really long way also to practice with people you're not comfortable with or who aren't, 1 degree of separation from you. So instead of asking your sibling or your best friend who you can laugh in the middle of an interview question with and it's totally fine, ask your boss or ask a prof or ask your friend's mom or your friend's aunt, someone who's not immediately in your circle, who, if you were to start laughing or if you were to mess up in the middle of a question, you would feel awkward stopping and you would kind of force yourself to keep going. Those are the kind of situations you want to put yourself in before you're actually in the interview, because that's what the interview will be like. Once you've gotten through your interview, you've worked hard, and hopefully you've gotten an acceptance letter waiting in your inbox. You should absolutely be celebrating that moment. It's an unreal moment. I have goosebumps still thinking about when I got my acceptance. But the tough reality is there are more qualified applicants than there are seats in dental school. There aren't many dental schools in Canada. There are even few that are super excited to take people from out of province. And there are so many people who are super qualified who would make phenomenal dentists applying every cycle. Sometimes all the hard work and all the hours that you put in and all the qualifications that you have just aren't enough. And sometimes you just need a little bit of luck. Don't let yourself be discouraged if this particular application cycle didn't work out for you. Take the time to go back to all the notes that you've compiled and all the prep that you did, and work to improve it, see where you can, amend it or make it a little bit better. Keep practicing for interviews, keep practicing for Casper, and go into the next application cycle even more confident and even more, ready to take on the challenges that come with the application cycle. And so I know I am at the 30-minute mark, but I'll give a few last minute sort of what I wish I knew from my journey through this, my time through the dental school journey. One thing I wish I knew was to join my school's pre-dental society early. It's a really great way to meet upper years who are currently writing the DAT, currently applying, currently writing Casper, currently just accepted into dental school. And so they will be an even better resource for you because you can see them go through it and you can see what they're doing and you can ask them immediately, what works, what doesn't work, what should I be doing? And once they start dental school, they'd be a really great person for you to follow and to keep in touch with. Reach out to current dental students. We all did it while we were in our application cycle, whether you were following them on Instagram or someone who's in dental school. We're all super, super happy to give back and to help in whatever way we can. We love what we do. We are so passionate about dentistry and being dental students. And so any opportunity to share that with someone, we would absolutely take it. So if you have questions about dentistry or dental school, reach out to dentists, follow them on Instagram. You'll learn a lot too. And yeah, that's a really big piece of advice that is really great for any stage of the journey that you're on. And then what I wish I knew before starting dental school, if you're towards the end of your application cycle, imposter syndrome doesn't go away. You're never gonna not feel totally ill-prepared or totally unqualified, but you're not alone in feeling like that. I've spoken to a ton of classmates. We all feel like that, and it doesn't go away. Spoken to upperclassmen and new grads. Be prepared to feel like an imposter for a long time, and that's okay. It means that you're still learning and you're still in the journey and you're in the process, and that's healthy. Unlike some other professional programs, we are not pass-fail in dentistry, at least in Canada. And if you are interested in pursuing a specialty, just remember that grades do matter, and you're applying with a percentage grade. If you're really set on being a general dentist, you still need to pass all your courses. But if you're unsure if you want to specialize and you want to keep that door open, keep your grades up as much as you can. But don't sell your soul to the program and don't sell your soul to the profession. At the end of the day, you're going to be working in order to live. You're not going to be living in order to work. And that's a really important distinction that I learned in my first year of dental school that I honestly wish I knew during my application process too. And the last thing really quickly is someone told me to start studying before the summer before dental school. Don't do it. Take the time to relax, take the time to enjoy. You have the rest of your life and the rest of your career to study and to practice and to learn dentistry. Enjoy that quiet before the storm, rest up, lock in some extra sleeping hours because they will be lost soon, and just get ready for the most amazing experience with all the ties and all the flows. So if you do want to talk more, or if I'm not able to get to your question in today's session, I have a bunch of different packages that you're welcome to book through the site, whether it's just kind of talking about dental school or the application in general, brainstorming or editing your application live, or having me do it beforehand and kind of going over the edits together, as well as different interview prep packages. And so with that, I will open the floor to if anyone has any questions about dental school, applying to dentistry as a profession from what I've seen so far, or anything in between.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Ariel, if you were comfortable sharing with us, could you maybe tell us what your scores were that you got, that you had, and that you got into dental school with?
That's a really fair question. I've been asked to share my stats a lot. I'll say they were decently competitive, but that being said, I know a lot of my classmates and a lot of my peers in other dental programs had such a wide array of scores on Casper, GPA, and the DAT. So even kind of knowing what one particular dental student's scores were isn't really a great indicator, in my opinion. I think you're better off looking at the admission statistics from each school and looking at what the admissions committee is looking for, because not every admission committee looks at every part of the DAT. And you can see the median score of that particular class in that particular section. Same with GPA. You won't see Casper quartiles on there, but you can infer that they're pretty competitive. But from what I've sort of been hearing from my peers and from the incoming class as well, it seems like the standard deviation in terms of the range of GPAs and DAT scores that are getting in is definitely growing. So having a particular score, a particular benchmark seems to be meaning less and less, sort of from what I've seen. Does that answer your question, Travis?
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have another question if you don't mind me asking. Just kind of
Yeah, of course.
waiting if anyone else wanted to go. Would you say that there's like a specific number of hours that we should have for each extracurricular?
In terms of like, again, a quantified answer, no. I don't sit on any admissions committee, so I don't know very specifically what they look for. What I can say is, from, again, what I've heard from my peers and what I really focus on that helps me succeed is picking a few extracurriculars that you can really spend a lot of time in, being able to demonstrate that you can commit to something for multiple years, being able to demonstrate that you can grow and take on leadership positions within an organization, and that you have that commitment to whatever it is that you're passionate about, and that you're not going to do sort of a little bit of everything and then a lot of nothing. I think that can go a long way. And even more so, it's really helpful to kind of hone in on a few extracurriculars and spend a lot of time doing those, because the more time you engage with an extracurricular, the more sort of range of experiences you can have with it, and the more stories that you have to pull from when it comes to writing your personal statement and interviewing and writing all those essays. So again, to answer your question, I wish I had like a set number of hours that's sort of competitive or good. I don't, unfortunately, but that was my perspective on it, and that's what I focused on throughout my undergrad.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah,
very reasonable. Thanks.
sure. There's a question in the chat that reads, some Canadian schools have both med and dent. Is there any disadvantage in applying to both in the same cycle? For example, I heard that Western doesn't see it favorably. I don't know if this is true. Really great question, super valid question. I have always known that I wanted to be a dentist. I was that really weird kid in elementary school who, when everyone wanted to be an astronaut or a rock star, I wanted to be a dentist. So I never looked into the med school path. That was never something that sort of was on my radar. So I can't answer that question, unfortunately. But that being said, I'm sure there's someone on the Accepted Together site who has applied for both and who would be a better candidate to answer that. If you want to message me afterwards, also, I'm happy to go back to school and try to crowdsource with my friends and get back to you within a few days. So you can follow this QR code that's on the screen, actually, and shoot me a message just to kind of reiterate your question, and I'll try to get it back to you sometime next week. All right. Any other questions? QR code isn't working. Oh, I do apologize. If you search up my name, oh, I will drop the link in the chat in just 1 second. Let me grab it. And in the meantime, there's another question. If you graduate from Western, for example, can you do the residence in other provinces other than Ontario? That is a great question. In terms of completing a residency, to my best knowledge, and again, I'm still pretty early on in my career, so I'm not the best person to address this, but from what I've read and what I've seen so far, licensing is federal as well as provincial. So in terms of completing residency in another province, that depends on the province itself. I'm not sure if you'll have to write an additional exam in terms of just like more of the policies of practice, but you won't have to do a full set of boards the way you would if you wanted to complete a residency in the States. So it's a little bit lighter. I don't know if there is any additional exam that you have to write, but that's a really good question. And again, I'm happy to crowdsource and get back to you sometime next week if you shoot me that message also. Any other questions? I'll be on for a few more minutes if anyone thinks of anything last minute. Again, if something comes up, if you think of something later or sometime next week or whenever it is, feel free to follow the link and shoot me a message. If it's a quick question, I'm happy to just answer it over there. Also happy to set up a session where we can chat and we can kind of talk more in detail about what it is that you're wondering, and I can do my best to answer your question in that capacity instead.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Just while we're waiting for people to think of a few more questions, I just want to hop on as the representative for QCO tonight. My name is Danielle, I'm VP of Experiences. So very much so, we're so glad to be offering this symposium with Accepted Together tonight. It kind of gives a taster event to our big conference coming up in January. So QCO stands for Canadian Undergraduate Conference on Healthcare. It's the largest of its kind across Canada. We're discovering different healthcare professions. This year, we're taking a focus onto AI, technology, innovation, all that stuff. So opportunity to have hands-on experience, networking. We've got workshops, speakers, case challenges, all that good stuff, a panel as well in the works. So stay tuned for that. We'll have publications coming up and we look forward to connecting with everyone soon. We got another 2 minutes for questions, so take advantage while you can.
Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. There was one question in the chat about the passing rate in Canadian dental schools. It's amazing how the schools successfully carry every single one of the students. It is really amazing. I don't know the passing rate off the top of my head. I believe it's super high and very comparable to the medical school. I believe Western's is like 100% graduation rate for the dental school, but I'm not confident that that's the most up-to-date statistic. But you're absolutely right that it's amazing how the school carries each and every single person. When you start a professional program like dentistry, the school has chosen you. Out of a sea of applicants, they've hand selected you to invest in. They're dedicating their resources, their materials, their professors, their knowledge, their expertise, and their time in order to help hone you into the dentist that they already know that you can be and that you will be. And so once you're there, the school is going to do everything in their power to help you succeed, so long as you're putting in the effort too in the work, of course. It takes two to tango, but it's no longer that competitive sort of cutthroat environment. The school wants everyone to be successful and amazing and, you know, filling a particular niche within dentistry. And so they want you to do well and to be the best that you can be. So I hope that answers your question as to why passing rates are so high once you're already in these professional programs. And one last question here. What do you think is the difference between people who get in and have good grades versus someone who doesn't get in but also has good grades, if not higher, specifically for Schulich? That is a tricky question because you're asking me to look at one variable when a person or an applicant is so much more than just their grades or just their stats. It could come down to the quality of their personal statement, their background, what they studied, how their particular interview and what sort of personality that they have, how that fits into the context of the rest of the class. It could just be something random that they did, some sort of extracurricular that caught the particular applicant reader's eyes. There's so many different things that could be different outside of just grades that, like I said, it takes a little bit of luck to get in. There are so many qualified people applying, and the reality is there's only so many seats. So I don't think there is one specific difference between those two characters, but it's holistic. It's everything about the application and about the interview, what you say, how you present yourself, and all that good jazz. So please let me know if that helps kind of answer your question at least a little bit. I know it's not super specific. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.